Okay, everyone, welcome to our Legal event. This is going to be one of the last ones we have for this quarter. We have Giselle Valdez here with us today. She attends Columbia Law, and she's also the founder of the LegalGist. She's going to be explaining with a quick presentation the first 30 minutes, and then we're going to ask her some of the questions that you guys have submitted to us. With that being said, Giselle, would you like to introduce yourself and let our members know everything there is to know?
Sure. Thank you for having me. And it's so nice to be here with all of you, even through Zoom. My name is Giselle Valdez. I'm currently a 1L at Columbia Law School. Before law school, I graduated from undergrad also at Columbia in 2020. I studied English literature, and then I did a master's at Oxford in the social science of the internet. So I'm really interested in technology law, media law, and generally that realm. And so now I'm a while here back at Columbia. So I'm really excited to give this presentation, really giving y'all the lowdown or just the resources I wish I would have had. I'm a first-gen Latina aspiring lawyer. And I'm from San Diego, so from Southern California. And so for me, going through this process, when I went through it, almost 2 years ago now, it was just so daunting because I couldn't find one place for all the resources that were affordable and accessible. So I started the LegalGist with that motive, just to make it all in one place, and the things that I wish I would have known and the pre-law programs I wish I would have did. So right now I'm going to start the presentation, and it should be short, relatively, 30 minutes. And then after that, I really am an open book for any questions you have. Even if you want to get personal about it, I'm more than happy to speak about my experience, as a woman of color and first gen going through this process. So I hope this is helpful. And let me share my screen. Oh, wait, is it possible I think it won't let me share my screen. Okay, perfect. So, sorry. Okay, great. Can everyone see that? Awesome. So as I said, this is really like the gist of the things that I wish I would have known, the timeline, and I'm really going to go chronologically here, step by step. And again, I know y'all have questions at the end, but if there's any part of this you want more information on, feel free to ask. Okay, so a little bit about me, as I said, first gen Latina aspiring lawyer. I went to undergrad at Columbia, did a master's at Oxford. I also, one thing I will note is I'm really interested in the private sector, so corporate law. So last summer, the summer before law school, I did the SEO Law Fellow program, which I think all of you should have on your radar, even if you're not interested in corporate law. They also have a pre-law program called the SEO Catalyst program. And so I was a participant in that program, and I was at Cleary Gottlieb in New York City. An incredible experience to not only learn about corporate law, but also get valuable skills in a valuable community of diverse aspiring attorneys that I'm friends with right now at Columbia. So really a huge plug for that. Just to give you a sense of some of my pre-law involvements in undergrad, if that's helpful. Columbia had a Columbia undergraduate law review, so I was involved in it all 4 years, and in my final year as editor-in-chief. I also interned for a summer on Google's legal team through the BOLD program, and I was an administrative work study assistant at Columbia Law School throughout my 4 years there, and I did a bit of voting rights work for the Eric Holder Initiative. So those were my main involvements. Now in law school, I'm on the intellectual property moot court team. I'm also a professional development representative for Latinx Students Association, which is a really great org. And I'm also a Columbia Law School Pathways mentor. Another program you should look into, that's a pre-law program if you are from the Manhattan area. And next year I'll be the co-president for that program. It's basically a pipeline for diverse pre-law students. Oh, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. So I want to start with the before you apply process, the discernment process, because I don't think enough people spend enough time reflecting on this. So these are some of the questions that if you're a journaling person, you just want to think about it, just really take time to reflect, because law school really is an investment of everything, not just money, but it's of time, it's of energy, it's of, emotional effort. And so you really want to make sure that this is the right pathway for you. So some questions I really ask myself are, what are my motivations? Why do I want to be a lawyer? Why do I want a law degree? And am I ready to take on this investment, as I said, of time, of money, of dedication? Because really 1L is, it really tests, I think, your abilities to kind of persevere and be really disciplined. Another questions that I think you should have a relative idea of before you go to law school, even if you're going straight through, is what type of law am I interested in? What involvements can I pursue to explore this type of law? So all of y'all are already in a pre-law organization, which I think is a great way to do that. What lawyers can I talk to or events can I attend to learn more? I know at Columbia in undergrad, there always be law school events, or there would be a pre-law org hosting an event. And I just tried to go as many as I could. And if there was a woman of color attorney there or a woman attorney there, I would always try to connect with her after and set up a quick chat for 20 minutes. Another thing is, can you pursue an internship while you're an undergrad or post-undergrad at a law firm, a legal organization, a company, a legal department like I did at Google because I was interested in tech law? And another question you should consider is, where do I want to practice? Do I want to be in California? Do I want to be in New York? And then last, I think the really key question is timing. When should I apply? I think now more than ever, most people are waiting a year or two, if not more, to go to law school. I do know people that go straight through. I always thought I would go straight through, but I actually chose to do a 1-year master's in between. And that was the best decision I think I've ever made, because I think it just allows you to have a unique perspective in the classroom that you wouldn't otherwise have if you had gone straight through. But more than happy to speak more about that. I have a post about this on the Legal Gist, but one really great way to learn more is through podcasts. And so these were some of the ones I listened to. On the left here, you have LSAT related ones. I really recommend Thinking LSAT. I just really love that podcast when I was studying. And it's just an easy way to get in the headspace. The Navigating Law School Admissions podcast with Miriam and Christy is also great. They're the admissions at Yale Harvard Law School. I listened to that throughout my application process as well. And on the right, there's also podcasts that relate to kind of what does being an attorney look like. And they have interviews, informational interviews with attorneys. And as a plug, the Legal Gist will be starting a podcast soon with all women and women of color attorneys and students to speak about their experience. So be on the lookout for that, which I'm really excited for. Okay, so once you've decided to go, let's go through the more, tangible, comprehensive steps you'll have to take. So first thing, you've decided you're going, look into these law scholar programs. I have 3 different posts on this on the Legal Gist. If you go to the guide section, and I think there's about 15 to 20 of them, apply to as many as you can. Many of them are for like your sophomore, junior, maybe senior year for some of them. And they're going to pay for your LSAT prep course. They're going to cover maybe your LSAT costs, help you with admissions counseling. And a lot of them are now moving to remote options as well. So to expand their reach. So look at these, find their deadlines, and definitely apply. So in terms of timeline, I'm going to start with LSAT because I think for pretty much every applicant, this tends to be the most time-intensive process. I know for me, at least it was, and I can speak more about that at the end if anyone has questions on my specific timeline. So this is a timeline that I would recommend. And the reason why I'm recommending this timeline, I know some people are like, give myself 2 months to study. I'll take a prep course for 2 months and I'll take it and I'll be done. I really think for the majority of the people, it doesn't work that way. And so you don't want to be in a situation where you thought you'd take the August and get it done, but you're having to take, September, October, or later one, and you're also applying. It can be really stressful with your timeline. So this is a timeline I recommend to have everything kind of ahead in advance. So it mean, January, February, you're taking a practice test cold diagnostically to see, where you're at. And then creating a plan based on your target scores, and your target scores are probably going to be like the medians. So the 50% or 25 to 75 percentile of the law school you're attending. And I'll go into a slide later on, a resource you can look at to see what those numbers are. And then you can begin self-studying through books. I did pretty much self-studying, and I'll go through resources later that I used. And then April, May, you would practice test after practice test, which is really just the best way to study is practicing. May, assess your score averages, and then you can set yourself up to do the June, July, August. I think if you leave yourself 3 tries to do it in the summer before applying in October, it's going to allow you to separate your writing process. So writing your personal statement and your final drafts of all your supplement essays, you're going to be able to separate that from your LSAT, which I really think is the best place you're going to want to be to put forward your best application. So here's are some affordable resources. I have a post on this, but I'm just going to highlight a few of the ones that I personally loved. I think the consensus is that most people use either 7Sage or LSAT Demon for buying. It's like a month, you pay per month and you get to take practice tests through it. Both are very, very similar and both have a free month trial. So try out both, see which one you like. I preferred the LSAT Demon because it has, after every question, sometimes up to 10-minute long video explanations. And I'm a really visual learner. So that really helped me to have tutors breaking it down. And you can even ask a question in the chat from one of the questions you're working on, and they'll respond to you with actual writing and paragraphs like within the next couple days. So I really like the LSAT Demon, but a lot of people like 7Sage. As I said, the Thinking LSAT podcast is run by the tutors of the LSAT Demon. So I use both of those in junction because I liked their style. They're a bit harsh, but I found them funny. So it kept it a bit more entertaining. But some people really like 7Sage. A lot of people use the Power Score Bibles, and they also have a podcast. And then I list some other resources. Reddit really, for me, ended up being a resource. I know for some people it can get a bit toxic because the people on there sometimes can be a lot. If any of you have joined like the Reddit law school admissions threads or the Reddit LSAT threads, I personally found it so helpful because if you ask a question, someone will answer it usually within an hour. And so I really liked that aspect. If you can distance yourself from maybe the people that are just, posting every 5 seconds about their scores. These are some tips I wish I would have done in the process. As I said, I mostly self-studied, bought my own books, used the LSAT Demon and free resources. I actually wish I would have invested in a more intensive prep course or a private tutor because, and I'll talk about this a bit more later, sometimes a 2-point score increase can lead to thousands of dollars in financial aid packages. It really can be that way. And so investing in a prep course sometimes can lead to better results in your financial aid packages if it increases your score, which it likely will, because of the support that class or that tutor is going to give you. For example, I've had friends of mine that reapplied this year with 2 to 3 point higher LSAT score, and not only were their acceptances much greater, but one of them now received like a half ride at Columbia for having just an increase of 2 points. So these are the times that you kind of realize, like economically, if you're financially able in the moment to save up and do that, I'd say it could be a good investment for the future down the line to save tens of thousands of dollars with a scholarship or financial aid package at another school. And then, as I said, again, separating the LSAT process from the application writing process. And I'm going to continue re-emphasizing that because this process is already so difficult. You don't want to be stressing yourself out by finishing up your personal statement and having to study for the LSAT a couple hours a day. So now to move on to the application process. So here are some resources, and I have a post about this on free law school reports that you should check out. These law school reports are so helpful because they not only help you get a sense of the school, but they also allow you to see, where do I sit in terms of other applicants with my averages. So the ABA 509 reports are the most well-known, and essentially they provide a resource to give a breakdown of each class at a law school. So you can see what percentage identify as women, what percentage identify as minority student, what percentage identify as first gen. And so it gives you a really good metric, I think, to see law school diversity, to see if you could fit in there. It'll show you, male versus female percentages. And so it really just helps break it down, which I think is really helpful. LST reports is also a great resource that's quite similar. And they actually, I just saw a couple days ago that they're partnering now with LSAC to make their reports in junction with the law school process with LSAC. So that should be really interesting to see how that platform gets even bigger than it is now. But it's a great way to also see, what are the percentage employment aspects? So like, what are the percentage of graduates that are going to go work in California versus New York? What percentage are working at a corporate law firm in the private sector versus a public interest position? So that gives you a really good sense of what your employment outcomes would be. US News is known as, the most widely used metric for ranking law schools. And it's definitely something to consider, that ranking. It's the one that's most well known across the US and for future employment opportunities. That being said, I really recommend checking out the Above the Law rankings and the Above the Law website as a whole. These rankings, rather than being about LSAT score averages and GPA averages, they look at employment outcomes post-grad. So there's some schools that wouldn't perhaps be on the T14 for US News, but are on the T14 because on Above the Law, because their bar passage rates are very high. They're having really prestigious clerkships after graduation and job opportunities. So maybe check that out and see if there's a school that isn't on your list that you should maybe include. LS Data is a really great resource that you put in your GPA and your LSAT, and it puts you essentially on a bar plot where you can see where you stand in comparison to previous years of acceptances and denials and waitlists. So that's also a really helpful platform. That being said, don't get too caught up in numbers because as always, there's always other elements. This is a comprehensive review, but I think it is really helpful to see where you lie on that plot. Some things I wish I would have known while applying is I only applied to 10 schools because I had this idea that I would only apply to schools that I would 100% go to if I got in. I wish I didn't do that at all because I didn't realize until later that for financial aid negotiation, if this is something that's of concern to you, it's in your best interest to apply to literally, if you're looking at T20 schools or T30, to apply to those like at least 20 schools within the range that you're looking at, because even if you have no interest, like I wouldn't have a lot of interest in going to a school in the South, for example, that wasn't something that I was interested in. But let's say they give you a really substantial scholarship and they're a pure institution to a school that you really want to go to. What you can do is you bring this financial aid package to that school you really want to go to, and they're similarly ranked, and usually they'll match it or at least raise the financial aid package that they initially gave you. So if you're smart about it and you start in advance and you apply early, you can literally go up the ranking with the schools that you have and raise your financial aid packages one by one, which is something that I did end up doing to get the package that I wanted to attend Columbia. But I wish I think I got lucky that one of the peer schools did that. I wish I would have applied to 20 to have a bit more of that security. So that's something I'd really recommend. Just because you want to work in a city too doesn't mean you need to go to law school there. I actually towards the end was really considering Duke. And even though I wouldn't want to live there post law school, I realized that employment outcomes aren't really determined by the location that you're in. You can generally go to any big city, so choose the place where you fit in best. Ranking really isn't everything. The US News is definitely looked at, and I won't lie, law can be very hierarchical, but at the same time, if you're interested in public interest, which doesn't really pay as much, it may be within your best interest to pursue a school that gives full rides. And the reality is most of the T14s don't do that. And if they do, it's a very difficult process to get it. So maybe look at a local school where you can get a full ride and then pursue your dreams in public interest. The more safeties you apply to, the better. The cycle I applied, I think this past cycle has been much better, but the cycle I applied had like record numbers of applicants that hadn't been seen in like decades. And so it was really difficult because a lot of applicants, including myself, sometimes I heard from schools very, very late in the process, much later than I was expecting. And that was because, it was a very high number of applicants in that year with really great LSATs. So you never know what that year can be like. So always just apply to more safeties because the more safeties, the better. Make sure you talk to students at law schools beforehand. I did that when I was going through my decision process, but I actually wish I would have done that before I applied, because you get a sense of, do I even want to spend time applying to that school, or should that school be in my top rank of interest? So now to talk about recommendations, and I'm going to go over this quickly because it's generally pretty similar to the undergrad process. One thing is that every law school is different with the requirements. So applying to law school is going to require a lot of organization. It's not like the Common App where everything could be kind of similar. Or I remember like the UC app, it was also like kind of similar processes. It's not like that for law school. Every single law school has a different supplement, different quirk, different application. You have to submit every application separately, send your recommendations separately, school by school. So you really want to get organized. Some schools require 2 to 3, some it's up to 4. Some want a specific number of academic letters versus professional. So just make sure you check. Always ask one more recommender than needed. I was waiting for one longer than I thought I'd be waiting, and my application was done. And so I wish I had maybe asked for one more to just get some of them in a little bit earlier. Who should you ask? I would really prioritize professors above all. And I think, if you have a supplemental, I wouldn't say more than 2 professional connections or mentors, then you can add those in as well. One thing is people think that like having a prestigious, recommender is really going to stand out. Don't ask them unless they know you personally. Just use your intuition about that, because I do think it's really about who knows you best. This is the way that I asked, and I think it's really helpful to do it this way. I would, for the professors I was already connecting with, I would meet in office hours, and every single one of them, I would tell them I was interested in going to law school. I think starting like, my junior year, when I knew that is what I was going to do. And then the summer before I applied to law school, I sent a formal email asking them with not too many details, but just the ask. And then once they agreed, I followed up with what I listed here. And I have a post about this on the LegalGist, but the resume, I sent them like a notable paper that I got a good grade on in their class, which I think is really helpful to do, that some people don't do. Details about every school I was applying to, any information they should highlight with some key language that maybe they could just borrow from, and then what my legal interests were. And also really emphasize the deadlines, and not like the deadline of applying, but your deadline, and just say that that's the deadline, because sometimes the professors, they get busy and they forget. So, and always be sure to thank them. So now that you are applying, this is just kind of a sense of a timeline that I think is helpful, so that you're not doing things last minute. And as I said, you're putting your best application forward. So in April, May, I would start drafting ideas for personal statement, but the earlier you can come up with a personal statement idea, the better. So if it comes to you, even a year before, just draft it, have it in the archive waiting for you. So it's really the personal statement and diversity statement. If you identify as diverse in any way, that is really broadly interpreted. I will say it's not only if you're an underrepresented minority, there's a lot of other forms of diversity. And I would look on Reddit, for example, to see what other people have done. But again, that should be interpreted broadly. And I really think like it should not be 2 drafts, 3 drafts. Like it should be a draft. Like you should be on draft, I'd say 8, 9, or 10 before you really are in the place to submit. You want to show it to as many people as you can, to your mentors. I send some to my recommenders, to my family, to myself, to just make sure it's your best writing put forward. So then you'll be finalizing it in June and July, and also finalizing your school list, because every school tends to have, especially the T14, have supplemental essays that are shorter, that are school specific. So you want to kind of have your big statements relatively done, so that you can also spend time on those supplemental essays too. Then in August, you can work on your supplement essays, and by then you're hopefully done with the LSAT, so you have more time to finalize your personal statement and your resume and your diversity statement. And then you can also apply for fee waivers, which is a process which I can go through more in depth if you're interested in it. But I got fee waivers for every school that I applied to, because you can usually email them if they don't send you one automatically. And then in September, October, you fill out your applications to apply. I really recommend applying early October. I didn't do that, and I really, really regret it. I just didn't realize how time consuming the application process is. Because as I said, you submit school by school. So you have to go through and fill out everything per school and double check everything per school. And so the earlier you can start applying, I think the better. Also, it's rolling. I think as most people know, it's a rolling process. So you're just going to have better odds if you're looked at in the beginning versus being looked at the very end, when they've already given acceptances and had waves of acceptances for people. So as I said before, organization really is key. I did like a Google Drive folder and had a spreadsheet of all my deadlines for each school, what their supplements looked like, just to get myself organized. As I said, generally it's a personal statement plus diversity statement, or some people do a YX law school statement. If that's a really top school for you and you're not maybe necessarily submitting a diversity statement, you can do a YX law school, which is basically like why you want to go to that law school specifically. And it's tailored towards their clinics, their journals, their student orgs, etc. And I really think with the personal statements, and that's why I emphasize kind of having an early draft, in the summer, is because it's just hard to get creative when it's last minute. And it's also hard to be precise when it's last minute. And the personal statement is short, so it's about brevity. So in order to get to that place where it's concise, clear, and descriptive and creative, you really got to have time. And then also, so some of the supplements for especially the T14, T20 schools will say that they're optional. I wouldn't treat it as optional. It's like, I definitely think you want to do them, because if you don't do them, I think the way that reads to the school is that, this isn't someone that's interested in prioritizing our application process. And so you want to show that interest. So resume, what's interesting is the resume is a little bit different than I think like a professional resume would be. It doesn't need to be one page. In fact, I had people tell me that, if you can make it 2 pages, make it 2 pages. You want to make it as descriptive as you can to show what are the projects you worked on, what's the research that you did, and not only academically, but professionally, what's that work experience, or what are awards you've been given. I would follow legal resume format templates that you see online. Again, as with any resume, check your margins. The Miriam and Christy podcast, Navigating Law School Admissions, has a really good episode on this, where they would say, like, I'd notice on the resume if the margins aren't aligned. And these are things that you just want, it's about the details. Use numbers, have someone check it. If you have a career services office, that's what I use to make sure that my resume was reviewed. And also some law schools require different formats. So for example, if you choose to apply to Yale, they require you to put the hours per week per activity. And they also require you to separate your undergrad resume versus your postgrad resume. So those are things that when I was like starting to fill out my applications, I didn't even realize that I had to do that. And that takes time, so it's good to just have all those requirements ready, and also, be ready to do different formats of your resume if needed. Here are some free resources that I use that I think are really, really great for the application process. The Harvard Law School has a blog run by their admissions team. I would read all of their posts. I think it's really, really helpful. The Reddit thread Law School Admissions, which, as I said, can get a little bit toxic around acceptances, but I found it a really helpful resource, and many others do. Just if you're the type to kind of get caught up in seeing other people's results, maybe stay away from it a little bit more, but I found it really, really helpful. Spivey blog. Spivey is known as like one of the best consulting practices for law school admissions, but they have a free blog. Their resources are quite inaccessible and expensive to get consultants, but their blog is free. So I definitely check out their blog. It's very helpful. Seven Sage has a law school acceptance predictor where you can put in your stats, but also they have this application course that's only $10 and has videos step-by-step of the process. I watched that in summer before I applied, and I just found it really helpful to get like an understanding of what every step was, and really affordable too. Really recommend Seven Sage, and I especially recommend Seven Sage because they have a law school interview guide that basically for like the top 30 schools that do interviews, they have the questions and the model framework that they do, and my interviews were like that guide to a T. So I'd really recommend checking out Seven Sage for that too. Now for fee waivers. So this is something that you're going to apply to probably in August when applications start to open. Apply to them if you can. And if you don't get one, and you can apply through LSAC, by the way, but if you don't get one, sometimes you have to apply on their website, on the law school website. And if that doesn't qualify you, I'd email admissions and say, this is my situation. As I identify as this, can I potentially get a fee waiver? And send an email, because sometimes I'll also get you fee waivers too. In terms of budget breakdown, I wish I realized how expensive this process was going to be when I did it, because I was a student when I was applying, so it was really expensive. But just to give you a sense of this, and I have a more comprehensive post on this, but like just applying in and of itself is probably going to be around $600, even with as many fee waivers as you can get. It could definitely be less, but to do the credential assembly of service, which is required, is 200. Then the CAS report is $45 per school, and you can't waive out of that with the fee waiver. And then the LSAT in and of itself is $200. You'll probably take it a couple times. Most people do. And then the application fees is where you can get the fee waiver, which is why like I really recommend doing all you can, because if you're applying to 10 schools and each school costs $70 to apply to, it's just in your best interest to get a fee waiver to just lower all of that costs. Now to talk about interviews, and I know I mentioned that 7Sage resource, which I have on here, and I also have a post on this. Broadly, I mean, generally with interview advice, it's the same, but I do think law school is different in that they really want to hear about your legal interests, and they're going to know your resume front to back. So you should know it as well and be able to talk about any line on your resume, especially if you write a thesis or some sort of academic research. I got asked about that in every single one of my interviews. I would reread your essays to understand your motivations and your aspirations for going to law school. And then I would have prepared answers, and I had it for myself for why law and why X law school, because I got asked that in every single interview that I did. You don't want it to sound super scripted because interviewers can tell that. You want to sound authentic and sound yourself. But definitely, I think have a general framework or a couple bullet points that you want to make sure you hit in that response, because you just know you're going to get it. And also, it tends to be earlier questions. And I know for me, like if I have nerves with an interview, if I start with something that I kind of had prepared a bit in advance, you just get into a better rhythm and you feel much more comfortable. As I said, review 7Sage Law School Interview Guide, can't plug that enough. And then the Reddit Law School admissions will have people give like reviews or breakdowns of the interview that they had for law school, which I found really helpful, especially to get something a bit more recent in terms of interviews for that cycle. Now to talk about scholarship financial aid negotiation, and I have a post on this, but just to explain how it works, which I described a bit earlier. I basically did this. So I negotiated, like, as I said here, like over $500,000 in financial aid from top law schools. And the way that I did this is I had applied to 10 schools within this like T14 range relatively. And for each school that I got a financial aid package from, I went to a school that, based on US News Report, was within the 3 ranking range. So like, let's say, for example, it was a school ranked 7 that I got a great aid package from. I would reach out to the school ranked 10th and up to the school ranked 5th and say, this is my aid package, can you match it? And I would negotiate depending on who would match it. And then I would send it to a higher school and say, okay, well, these 2 have given me this, can you match it? And you usually have to send documentation for that. But that's going to really help you raise the amount of money that you're able to get from each school to the point where I was able to get my dream financial aid package from Columbia because of that negotiation. I will say though, Harvard, Yale, and Stanford don't really buy into that process as much. So you will probably be, I mean, I know some people get some financial aid, but they're just not as generous. Whereas like Columbia U Chicago, like you can negotiate almost to like full scholarships at times with them if you have other options on the table. So that's something that was really important to me, is I wanted a bit of financial independence. So that's just something to consider. But I would check out this post because I also have email templates that I use that I found really helpful, that were shared with me, and strategies that were shared with me that I think allowed me to be successful at this. So waitlist and seat deposits. There's different seat deposit late dates for each school. So as I said, a reoccurring theme here is every law school likes to do things their own way. So make a spreadsheet. I had a spreadsheet of those deadlines because you don't want to miss one of those deadlines. Also, one thing to note is your financial aid negotiation process tends to be really down to the wire to when these seat deposit deadlines start happening, because as I said, every school is different. So for example, I had a really great scholarship offer from Duke that I was using a lot to negotiate. And their deadline was 2 weeks before some of the other schools. So I wasn't going to be able to use it as a bargaining chip once that deadline was over, right? So sometimes you really are down to the wire. So you have to be really aggressive about it, where I was like calling financial aid offices. I was making sure that they knew that I had this offer that was expiring. You have to just be really proactive in advocating for yourself. You can submit seat deposits for multiple schools, but I wouldn't advise this because I just don't think it's best practices. I do know people who have done it, but it can just kind of leave a sour taste in the law school's mouth if you say, actually, I'm not going, and you're going to this other school because you couldn't decide by the May 1st deadline. You can definitely write a wait list and commit to a school. And then if you get off that wait list, go to that school. But sometimes you have to send additional documentation. So a letter of continued interest, or sometimes an additional letter of rec from a professor. And then lastly, on deciding a school, these are the strategies that I use. I also have a post on this that's much more in depth. I think the greatest help was talking to current students, alum, and professors, and telling them my options. So I would tell them, like, this is my financial aid package from X school, like this is, and that matters to me, like this is my offer from this school. What would you do in my situation? And did you have similar circumstances? They're really going to be such a great resource. I set up chats with at least 3 students from every law school I was highly considering, if not more. And the way that I did that is I'm identified as Latina. So I would look up their Latinx Students Association, and I would reach out to people that I think I had similar background to or similar hometown, things like that. And they were such a resource, like truly so helpful. And also I'm friends with them to this day. Some of the people I talked to at Columbia that convinced me, I'm still in touch with them. I would attend admitted student stays. They're definitely helpful. I would just understand that they also may say things that aren't as sincere as someone that isn't at admitted student stay, because they are representing the school. So the honesty may not be as on point as someone you reach out to that's not through that kind of pathway. But I think it's really helpful to get a sense of who are the students I'd be around, because that shows you who's been accepted, and also gives you a sense of professor connection as well. Also assessing your financial aid packages after negotiation. If you don't want to go into debt and incur all of that student debt, that's something to definitely consider. If you're going into public interest, there's this program called LRAP. Every school has a different LRAP process, but it basically pays for your law school loans if you're making under a certain amount. But I would look into see how great their LRAP process is if you're looking into PI jobs. Another thing is like thinking about you, where you want to live for these 4 years or 3 years. Where do you want to be happy? Where would you find community? Do you see student orgs you get along with? One thing that really brought me to Columbia is they were the only school that I was accepted into and that I applied to that did an admitted student stay just for individuals of color. And that for me was just, I felt like I could find community there, because at other ones I attended, I didn't see that representation. And so that really sold the school for me. If there's another interest of you or an identity of yours that you really want represented at the school, make sure that you see that at the events that you attend or the classes you attend and things like that while you're deciding. And lastly, I just want to highlight, since this is an organization for women, that the legal field needs us. I know this can be a really daunting process. There were times, especially the LSAT, which was really difficult for me, that I felt like giving up. And I was just so disheartened by the process, because I said, there's so many barriers, it's so gate kept. But at the end of the day, I think we should all try to feel empowered by our unique perspective that we're bringing to the field and how we're going to change the field in that way with, our diversity and our voice. So here's some numbers just to remind y'all why you should go through this process and why the legal field needs you. And yeah, here's to just highlight my Instagram. If you don't already follow it, I am sharing posts, and I will be sharing a lot more soon as I expand my team to help, just make more accessible, affordable resources available in a digestible way. So thank you. Definitely open to answer any questions you have about this presentation or about the process. But I hope this was helpful.
Thank you, Giselle, for giving this amazing presentation to us. Specifically, like for me, when you were talking about like the financial aid process and negotiating, that really helped me. And I think that that's something that I'm definitely going to do, where I'm going to expand the reach of schools that I'm applying to, just so I can work on negotiating a better package. But kind of going off of that, a few of our members did submit questions. And the first one is that you mentioned that you took a gap year and you did your master's degree during that time. Typically, when people take a gap year, they don't continue education and they're looking for work experience. And I wanted to hear what your unique story was when it came to deciding taking a gap year and then eventually going back to law school.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a really important question to think about. So I actually was trying to do both. So I was applying to jobs. I knew I was going to take a gap year or two. And so I actually originally thought I'd be a paralegal for 2 years because usually paralegal positions require a 2-year commitment, or I was going to do the master's. But with the master's, because it was Oxford, I knew it would just be, I honestly wasn't sure if I'd get in, and I didn't know if that process would work for me. I also wasn't going to go unless I had a fellowship to cover it. And so I thankfully that all worked out and I was really happy about it. But I also went through the recruitment for paralegal positions at the DOJ and then also in the private sector at corporate law firms. I actually had an offer from the US Attorney's Office to be a paralegal there for 2 years, which I had accepted, but I hadn't heard back from Oxford yet. And then I got in. And so then I shifted gears to do that program because that was my dream from the beginning. But I will say that I think either path, if you want to do a specialized master's or you want to do work experience, I think the most common pathway, many of my peers in law school have been paralegals before, like legal interns for 2 years. I think that's really common. Or worked on a campaign, did political experience, those types of experiences. I liked having a master's beforehand because even though it's been a lot of academic work, I also felt like I was still in the flow of school when I started law school, and I felt like I could keep up with the rigor because that's all I really had known for that time. But that being said, I do think work experience can be really helpful for the recruitment process for job positions once you're in law school, because I think what I've noticed with my peers is some of the people that went straight through with no work experience in undergrad or like summer internships or like undergrad job experience struggle a bit more in the job recruitment process because so many others have that, professional experience. I was thankful that in undergrad, I had to work to kind of support myself. So I had, that type of work experience for a few years, and I always worked during the summer. So I think that's really helped me in my job process now. But I do know for some of my peers, like I would really recommend if, you don't work after and you do a master's to get some tangible work experience that you can talk about that's related to the legal field. But in terms of my journey, doing a master's is really helpful because now in my classes, with this kind of tech niche that I have, I feel like I can talk about it with professors and say, this is my interest. I want to do tech law, media law. And this is what I'm interested in because I did a master's in that, and it really helps you stand out.
Well, thank you very much first of all, for your very informative presentation. I think as Rudy mentioned, the tips that you mentioned about negotiating financial aid was really helpful. I'm definitely going to use that as well.
Okay.
So another question that our members were interested in was what advice would you give in terms of networking? I know that you mentioned that having some kind of work experience is important during a job recruitment process, but do you think that being involved in on and off campus has an impact on law school acceptance?
Definitely. I mean, I'm not, like admissions person, so I don't want to, say everything's definitive. But I will say that it's those off, not in class experiences that you're going to talk about in your personal statements, in your diversity statements, right? It's also what you're going to talk about in interviews, that the stuff I talk about in my interviews for my law firm positions for next summer are things that are, not necessarily in the classroom, right? So I think really being involved in organizations, especially if they're legal related or they're just related to one of your passions that you want to pursue in law, I think is really, really important. Not only in just having a strong application, but also just making you like a well-rounded leader. I think you notice in law school that it's also a lot of it's not just like the tangible, legal skills you're learning, but how do you be a leader? How do you be a strong public speaker? How do you be a strong advocate? And I think those are the things you really learn, not in the classroom, but, in organizations and working with your peers and collaborating and, planning events and things like that. So I really recommend having, extracurricular involvement for sure, and especially leadership positions, because those are the things you're going to talk about in interviews down the line. And those are the things that you're going to keep as lines on your resume, even when you're in law school.
I definitely agree that when it comes to experiences, that's definitely something that's going to help us not only with networking, but creating a resume and also narrowing down what field of practice we want. And kind of going off of that, our next question was, how did you determine that you wanted to be in corporate law? I know you mentioned you did an internship with Google, and that showed your interest in tech law, but how did you specifically figure out that rather than public interest or technology, specifically corporate law is what piqued your interest?
Yeah, definitely. So I had because there's no lawyers in my family, I didn't even really know what a corporate law firm was, except from like watching Suits. That's like all I knew. And so, which is a great show and I loved it. And also, piqued my interest a bit because I was like, oh, that seems really fast paced. It seems really exciting. It really was the SEO Law Fellows program, which when I interviewed, I still didn't know about corporate law. I remember they asked me, which firm do you want to be at? And I just named some of the ones I'd seen online, but I didn't really know what it meant to work at certain firms. And last summer while I was working there, one thing I really enjoyed about it is just the fast-paced nature of it. I was working on, so basically in corporate law, there's two different sides. You're either doing litigation, you're doing corporate transactional work. Litigation tends to be like, the more courtroom things, you're writing briefs for a court, things like that. Whereas corporate transactionals, you're looking at these contracts to make these big mergers or these big deals that are happening that you see in the news, these big acquisitions. And I was working on some really exciting intellectual property and private equity deals. And I just found the process of looking through contracts very interesting. I liked it. And I also liked the pace of it. It is very fast moving, but there's something about that I found challenging and exciting and stimulating. I'm very passionate about public interest work. I did a lot of voting rights work in undergrad, and I'm very progressive. So I'm always, going for progressive causes. But one thing that's really interesting about corporate law is the opportunity to not only get exciting, corporate work, which for me, I can work on technology transactions or intellectual property, but I can also do a lot of pro bono. So last summer, even though I was just an SEO law fellow, I worked on various immigration pro bono matters, which are billed as normal hours. In addition to that, you're able to to be completely honest, I'm going to have some loans after law school, not as much as others will have, but I will have some. I'm also really hoping to be financially independent. And unfortunately, in public interest, I just don't know if that's a lifestyle I could afford in a big city, because I'm not supported by my parents in doing these things. And it's definitely doable, and there's people that do it, but I just think for me, it would be a bit of a struggle. And so for me, I'm kind of envisioning corporate law as an opportunity to spend, 2 to 3 years doing something where I can, become financially independent while also supplementing that with pro bono and then seeing where I go from there. The thing is with technology, which is, where I am really interested in, to be in-house at a technology corporation, and I learned this from my time at Google, you usually need about 4 to 5 years of experience beforehand before you can even be considered for a position like that, if not more. So I'm also kind of saying, maybe I'm, for a couple of years at a corporate law firm doing technology IP work, and then I transition into an in-house position at Google or Spotify or one of these big media tech organizations. But I'm really just open. Next summer, I will also be at a firm. I won't be at Cleary, but I'll be at a firm called Cooley that is really well known. Just to give you a sense, if anyone's interested, Cleary is really known for international work. So if you're interested in international law, I would really put Cleary at the top of your list because they have offices all around the globe, and everyone I met there either spoke, a couple different languages or, was from different countries. So Cleary Gottlieb is really known for that. On the other hand, Cooley, which is the firm I'll be at next summer as a 1L diversity fellow, is really known for their tech and media work. That's like their bread and butter, is working for tech companies and working on with emerging startups, which I find really interesting, and working with these really new companies. So even though it's corporate, you still can kind of find your niche or interest in that field while also supplementing that with pro bono hours as well.
Well, I can definitely relate to your experience because Suits was also one of the shows that gave me an idea about corporate law. And I think that resources that you provide are really helpful to undergraduate students who aspire to be a lawyer and go to law school. And our last question is, what advice would you share with our undergraduate buddy who aspires to attend law school, especially one as competitive as Columbia Law?
Yeah, I think my biggest piece of advice, and this is going to sound really cliche, but I'm such a firm believer in just finding your passion and then just re-emphasizing that passion in everything you do. I studied literature in undergrad, so I tend to think about a lot of things as stories. And when you're applying to law school, you're really like presenting your book, your narrative, your story to the admissions reader. And the best stories that we read, I think, are ones that are consistent and have a flow to it, right? So while you're an undergrad or even post undergrad, what's that unifying thread or theme that goes into every single thing that you do, right? And so like for me, for example, it was that I've always been interested in, creative ways of expression, technology, how do we reinvent, how do we innovate? And so in everything that I've done, even to my master's program or the thesis that I worked on there, that thread was there, right? I've also been always interested in an international diverse perspective because that's my upbringing and that's where I come from. That's my lens. And so everything I also did, I studied abroad and I did a thesis on an international digital privacy issue, right? So just inflected that into every single thing that I did. And so not that you need to be like really strategic about it, because you should let things come organically. But if there's a passion of yours, like follow that path and then just try to find that passion in everything that you do. And I think then when you come to the time of writing your personal statement or your diversity statement, it's going to be really easy to tell that story because you've been, planning out that story and having those themes, throughout your time of preparing to apply to law school. Whereas I think sometimes, and they're also like, you should take time for exploration. I didn't know I was interested in what I was interested in. I think until my junior year, I decided my major very, very late. So there's still that time for exploration. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. But I do think by the time you apply, you should know what that story is and that story that you want to tell, because it's just going to make your process a lot easier. I've also noticed in law school that and that's why I'm saying take time off, because I have a few friends of mine that went straight through. And I think even now in their first year, they don't really know what their story is. They weren't really sure what they wanted to do for their first summer. Whereas for me, because I'd always been like following that story, I knew immediately the type of opportunity I wanted to pursue professionally my first summer, because I kind of had taken that time to reflect, even if it was just a year, on what I wanted my narrative and my pathway to be. So I would just really recommend, finding that unifying thread and then just following it. If you're interested in the arts, for example, like how are you going to follow that and maybe write a thesis on that, maybe pursue an internship in that same field as well. Or let's say you're interested more in the corporate side, are you going to do, work at a financial institution and follow kind of that path as well, or public interest? How am I going to work at, a nonprofit that, works for criminal justice reform? And how do you find those opportunities so it's inflected into everything that you do? Because in telling that story in your interview and your application and your personal statement, it becomes really easy, and it also becomes very authentic because that's what you care about. So I really think, just following your passions in that way.
Thank you for that explanation. I think that's something that I'm also trying to figure out what my story is, and let it come in a more organic way, not to just do things that many people traditionally do because they think that it looks good on paper. I think I want to do things that enrich me in my personal life, because in the end, law school is expensive. So if we do want to go, it should come from like a genuine place. And all of the advice that you shared today definitely did like resonate and help me and guide me a lot. And I'm pretty sure even our members that are here with us today and that look at our recording when we email it or they look at it through our YouTube, they're going to have like a similar experience as me. So thank you so much for coming here today and sharing your experience with us.
Of course, I'm always happy to support women and support. I mean, this space is really hard. It's really tough, but I think, the wave's turning and seeing, more women applying to this process and going through this and succeeding is always so exciting. So I'm always here as a resource. Like you can contact me, through the Instagram channel, or if you like have specific questions now, I'm more than happy to answer for a couple minutes about anything, truly anything personal, because I think so much of this is gatekept that I try to, just be really open about my process, because I know it's difficult and I know I wanted that honesty when I was applying and thinking about law school. So I'm more than happy to help in any way.